Welcome to Letting Go University. Today we are on lesson 329 of the Course in Miracles workbook. I have already chosen what you will. So is there any imagination that there's something going on here other than God, other than oneness? Of course there is. All kinds of imaginations of separation. In fact, I've heard it said that the very first program we put in to all this ego stuff and everything we experience in creating our own world is this idea that we could have a separate experience from God. And so all this letting go stuff, all this Course in Miracles stuff, all this surrendering is about surrendering that choice in the past just to coming back home, returning to one. And there's this question about what is God's will, as if there could be more than one will. And depending on the level of consciousness that you're experiencing, it can definitely seem like there's more than one will going on. So today in this release, we're just going to let go of any sense that there's some separate will that we're experiencing besides God's will. And we're given some suggestions like, okay, if you're in joy and happiness and peace and are free of suffering, that you are at one with God's will. And could you just allow up anything other than that? I have already chosen what you will. Father, I thought I wandered from your will, defied it, broke its laws, and interposed a second will more powerful than yours. Yet what I am in truth is but your will extending and extending. This am I, and this will never change, the lesson reads. So let's begin. Could you just allow yourself to have already chosen God's will? You open up and just maybe, or just certainly, you've already chosen God's will. Perfect happiness at one with Him and all your brothers. You've already chosen God's will. And what else is needed? Could you allow yourself to notice any resistance to being at one with God's will? Do you need to plan? Do you need to figure something out? Is there any fear that maybe you're not already choosing God's will? Any sense of guilt or unworthiness? Because you're doing all these human things. Anything that comes up that would call into question whether you've chosen God's will or not. Guilt, fear, desire, anger. Could you notice that feeling behind any doubt, any question, or any outright denial or rejection that you have already chosen God's will? And could you open up and behind all the thoughts, just allow any feeling, any energy, any vibration you're aware of. And just go for it. Just really let that come up. More of that resistance to your having chosen God's will already. Could you let it be just a feeling? Let it run. And could you let go of that resistance to having already chosen God's will? Just letting go of that feeling as best you can. You don't have to. And sometimes you might say, yes, I could let it go, and it still seems like it's there. This means there's more. Sometimes you say no, and you release. It goes. Would you release the resistance to having already chosen God's will? Would you release this feeling? And just noticing any more of that feeling, maybe it dissipates, shifts to another feeling, or goes. Have you been choosing anything other than God's will? Does it seem like that? You've already chosen God's will. Does it seem otherwise? Just does it seem that way? And could you allow up or dive into anything that's coming up for you? Anything you're aware of? Behind all these thoughts, just diving into that feeling. Could you go into the feeling behind all the judgments about what you're witnessing? And just let it be a feeling just for now and go into it. Nothing to change about the feeling or modify about the feeling, just letting that feeling run. Maybe going deeper into it, diving into it. And it might just release all on its own. And could you release it? Would you release? When could you release? And just opening up and allowing any more of that to release, or going in deeper if there's more. Could you release some more? I have already chosen what you will. I have already chosen God's will. And how do I know? How do I know if I've chosen God's will or not? Well, maybe God's will is all that's really happening. But there's these judgments about whether what's happening is good or bad. What I'm choosing, is it right or wrong? So there might be some fear or guilt, energy. God's will is. How could there be another will? Well, but look at what I did here, and look at that, and look at what's going on with the body, and look at all this stuff. Isn't that bad? Isn't that bad what's happening? It sure might seem like it. So could just notice behind the judgments, behind the analysis, behind the division, dividing things up from one. How does that feel? guilt, fear, anger? Could you open up and just embrace any feeling, letting the thoughts drift by? A feeling that's not resisted will dissipate, will dissolve. Could you just embrace that feeling? That would have you calling into question what's happening here, as if it's God's will or not. Could you open up and allow that feeling behind those judgments, behind the trying to figure it out? And could you surrender this feeling, this experience, these judgments to God? Just could you surrender? Never have to surrender. Would you surrender to God? This feeling, these judgments, whatever seems to be happening, would you surrender to divine will? When could you surrender all that is to God? Or at least just this feeling, just this judgment, just this trying to figure it out, and have already chosen God's will. You have already chosen what God wills. There's a lesson way back at the beginning of the course. I do not perceive my own best interests. What's actually happening? Everything is in my best interests. I already am at one with God. He is your Father, you are His Son. You have already chosen what He wills. And could you allow for that possibility? That you're already at one with your source. There is one will, not multiple wills. And could you just surrender to the will of God, which is not different than your own? Would you surrender and accept your union with your source? Would you surrender and have no will apart from His? Would you surrender and recognize that we are one? Would you surrender and find your way at last to God? Maybe God wasn't out there. Maybe you are already at one with God. Could you continue surrendering any feeling other than joy, happiness, peace? Just surrender any of these feelings that would lead you to think thousands of thoughts that you could be separate from your Father, from your source. And it just takes what it takes. Having compassion, patience, as you just continue surrendering and being at one with God. Thank you so much for releasing, and have the best day you can.